Climate modeling started with India because Britishers wanted to predict Indian summer monsoon because that kind of
economically important.
Extremely, that's how they ruled the world, because they had food for their army.
The multilateral regime has a major deficiency in terms of enforcement.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. And after those jubilant highs on cricket, I think we are back to discussing doomsday stuff. But we are going to cover a wide arc, and I have a very eminent set of diverse panelists who are, as has been introduced, well versed in the policy space as well as in the climate science space. So right from the morning, I mean, we have been, there was a discussion earlier, and in fact, one of the aspects regarding keeping the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance was the fact that climate change was one of the reasons why India was seeking to renegotiate this, because of the increased water flow, increased snow melt. So you can see this is something which is, which is central to all of us. So let me begin with you, Arunabha. So this year, it will be 30 years since the Conference of Parties talks that first began in Berlin. That time there seemed to be a general sort of agreement in that, yes, the developed world did say that, did agree that, it was the carbon emissions were a problem that was caused because of, industrialization by them. And they did say that, it was up to them to, finance and encourage the developing world and the rest of the countries to move away to financing expensive renewable energy and move away from a fossil-based economy. It looks like that basic consensus is no longer there. I mean, it looks like, for instance, the United States is in denial mode. It says that more countries, China, for instance, or other countries have been, as Donald Trump calls it, ripping them off, and they should be taking a much greater role. So, do you think that this basic consensus is lost? Are we at some kind of no point of return? And can we kind of crawl back, so to say?
Thanks, Jacob, and many thanks for inviting me to the Hindu Huddle. Given everything that is going on, I think it's still also a sign of the resilience of our society that we can continue to have conversations of various kinds. Now, to your question, I think the basic consensus has evolved. It evolved in 2015 when we had the Paris Agreement, where basically the consensus moved from those who've created the problem need to fix it to those who created the problem need to fix it, plus those who are impacted the problem also need to contribute towards fixing it. And how you fix it, of course, then becomes a nationally determined approach. What is getting challenged now is whether the role of the multilateral regime dealing with climate has a relevance or not. And I would argue it still does, notwithstanding the US government's, the Trump administration's decision to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. And I would argue it matters for three reasons. First, the science is unequivocal. The planet is warming. The planet is warming because of human activity, and it is warming much faster than our models have anticipated. If we do not have a common platform to discuss the science and understand how this is impacting us, we are living in a fool's paradise to only blame somebody else. It's like, yes, you sneeze and I catch a cold, will I still not measure my own temperature and deal with my own fever? So it's not enough to keep blaming. The second reason that the multilateral regime still matters is that it gives us a sense of taking a stock of who is doing what and shining a spotlight as difficult it might be to enforce the commitments, shining a spotlight on who's getting the work done and who's just making empty promises does have a value in and of itself. And that leads me to the third reason. The multilateral regime has a major deficiency in terms of enforcement. But at the same time, it gives us an opportunity to now start striking, just like we're seeing in the world of trade, start striking sectoral agreements. So rather than expect that 30 years on, you will have a grand consensus on everybody agreeing to everything, we can have smaller coalitions, say, focused on renewables, focused on batteries, focused on supply chains, focused on steel, focused on buildings, and so forth. And you can continue to have action over and above what you can do on your own, leveraging the partnerships that you can draw on through these processes.
So we will talk in a little more detail about evolving such partnerships. But I'd like to pose a question to Suruchi, but can you hear us, Suruchi? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on, ever since President Donald Trump has come back, he has endorsed fracking. Drill, baby, drill is one of those, is one of those evocative lines that he's brought back. Do you see a return to, a time from 10 or 20 years ago when climate denialism was in vogue? Do you see us going back to that? Yes, Arunabha has said that, the science is unequivocal, but what are your thoughts on that?
So at the outset, my apologies for not being able to join in person for the complexities that basically stand to here in the northern part of India. I tend to agree the science is unequivocal, and there is no doubt around the science. The science has progressed very well over the years. We have the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which has, continuously been bringing out these reports, which basically indicate the advancement in our understanding with regards to how things are changing over time. So there is far more confidence and evidence, I would say, that is out there, which basically tells us about how things are changing. Just to give you an example, 25 years back, actually, when I started working in this field, and when I was interacting with people with regards to what the science had to say and the findings that we basically observed through the research we carry out, one of the things we definitely experienced was that people were not very convinced with what we were sharing with them. But today, we do not have to basically make the same case to people, because people are experiencing those changes. Whether you're talking about the heat waves, the floods, the rainfall, heavy precipitation incidences that we see around the country, and therefore, at least the body of evidence that I would say, and is out there, and for people, for themselves to basically feel that yes, there are things changing around you. So the science definitely is strong and solid out there, which continues to stay with all of us. Now, with Trump coming in and the sense of denialism that we basically see, I think what it's going to basically do, it may, give a halt to the pace at which things are needed to be done. And that's where the challenge basically is, because we do not have that time, and we constantly see the scientists basically saying that, we are already headed, we've touched the 1.5 degree, but already headed to go beyond it, and that basically brings a lot of challenges with regard to the impacts of climate change. And the kind of adaptation needs that countries would then basically need to look at. And that basically means, the need for the right kind of technologies, finance to be put in place to be able to help countries cope with the situations that they arise. So definitely the pace at which action is needed may see a setback. We are already seeing resources being rolled back. A clear example is with the closure of USAID and all programs that are running around the world. Of course, much
Thanks, Suruchi. Cuts on resources, even in, the NOAA, for instance, which, is kind of central to even India to preparing our monsoon forecasts. Without them, we won't have our climate models, etc., functioning at the most optimal. So, Sambuddha, first of all, I'd like to understand from you this: with President Trump's withdrawal of our funds to to research institutions, particularly climate research institutions. How critical do you think is that to climate research for the rest of the world? And secondly, is there a scope for India to pick up on some of this slack by, getting more funds for our own research? Can we build stuff which we now depend on the US by ourselves and consolidate on that? Your thoughts?
Most definitely. If you look at Trump's last regime, France capitalized on that. Okay, they appointed a lot of these professors temporarily in French universities, and there was a intellectual shift, and a lot of new research has come out of it. In terms of India, what I think will matter most is if we can stop the export of really bright PhD students to the US. If 50% of them are retained, then we can, because research is student-driven. Like a supervisor can give you a problem, and the student has to dig deep and figure out the solution to that problem, where we are lacking is the best of the brains are exported. It's a combination of post-colonial hangover and this idea that India is resource limited. This government and the previous government has pumped in a lot of resources, but utilization of those resources is lacking. And as you said, we are still reliant on NOAA for running our climate models. And the amount of money we spend in that domain, we should have our own climate models. Nobody in India runs their own climate model. They run a US model or a European model and tweak it to fit to Indian purpose.
Why is that? I mean, shouldn't we have had our own observation networks, etc.?
Lack of innovation. Like, remember, climate modeling started with, like, if you go back to your 6th or 7th grade geography, you learned about the Hadley cell and the Walker cell. And Walker was sent to India to establish first IISc and then IIT in Pune. So climate modeling started with India because Britishers wanted to predict Indian summer monsoon, because that kind of...
was economically important.
Extremely. That's how they ruled the world, because they had food for their army.
Yeah.
And yet we are still dependent on other countries to run our models.
Yeah. So, Arunabha, you've mentioned the importance of, since the Paris Agreement, when there was a general consensus on how the world should be moving forward. But India's stance has been very interesting. I mean, it initially has always said that climate change is a developed world's problem, and it is entirely up to you to come up with the solutions. And then at some point, we moved towards emissions intensity targets. Now we have a net zero target and renewable energy targets, etc. Do you think that India is going to commit to absolute reductions or some of that by 2030? Or do you, even if you think they do, should India be doing it? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Jacob, I'll answer this question slightly differently. You know, what India commits to in future is a matter of speculation. But let's please, first of all, understand, we've got to throw this canard out of the window that we should be acting on climate change only because someone else has told us to do this. This is a strategically silly thought to have. We have 3/4 of our 700-odd districts that are hotspots for extreme climate events. 80% of Indians are currently already living in areas that are highly vulnerable to multiple hydro-meteorological disasters. Not just a flood here and a drought there. It's a compounding effect. Climate change is already a macroeconomic crisis. With shrinking fiscal room, how many subsequent years of farmers' crop insurance are we going to be able to pay out? So let's stop thinking about what we are going to commit in international negotiations and focus on what we are doing at home. Right? And going back to what has just been said, I think we do have to invest a lot in understanding the impacts as they're happening in a hyperlocal way. My organization has developed the first high-resolution climate resilience atlas for India at a district and sub-district level. We have developed our climate economy model, which is in-house, which is not borrowed from overseas. But more and more resources, of course, have to be invested. Number two, we have to look at what is it that we're already doing that is economically feasible. When we began the National Solar Mission in 2010, a unit of solar power was 20 rupees a kilowatt hour. It was more expensive than coal. We had less than 20 megawatts of solar. We now have over 100,000 megawatts of solar, and a unit of solar plus battery storage is cheaper than a unit of coal. So it makes economic sense to keep investing in this. Number three, what do we need to do more? We are the world's second largest steel producer after China. Do we want to remain the world's second largest steel producer, or do we want to become the 10th largest steel producer? Or do we want to become the world's largest green steel producer? If you want to start thinking strategically about our economic development, climate action becomes part of your industrial policy, which is why India has recently come out with the first taxonomy on green steel anywhere in the world. We've come out with a green hydrogen mission, which is the second largest in the world. We've come out with a national mission on critical minerals, which was approved by Cabinet in January. These are the building blocks for a new, greener industrial system. Therefore, now let me answer your question, Jacob. It does not matter what India says in the negotiations. We've calculated that all the policies that have been put in place, if we implemented them for the targets that have been set for 2030, India would have reduced 4 billion tons of emissions compared to the baseline during this decade alone. India has not made an international commitment on absolute emissions reductions. But what we are doing currently in India would reduce emissions by 4 billion tons. Actions speak much louder than words.
It's a good point, Arunabha. Now, Sambuddha, I mean, you're a person who literally deeply studies the world's oceans and how climate change affects the oceans at multiple levels. So, could you tell me 3 things about what you know, about what people believe about how climate change affects the oceans, that is perhaps not really part of the general understanding? I mean, yes, we know that oceans, carbon dioxide heat increases, the oceans are going to rise and cities are going to be flooded. But are there 3 things that you research and you know that aren't as widely appreciated about how the oceans are changing vis-a-vis climate change?
That's an interesting question. First of all, we know about ocean acidification. Carbon dioxide gets in, makes the ocean acidic. We know about ocean warming per se. What are the implications of it? A classical example is you don't keep your soft drink outside. You keep it in a fridge. Because colder the water temperature, gases are more soluble in it. As you warm the ocean, there will be less and less oxygen in it. So the microfauna doesn't care about it. The algae doesn't care about it. The fishes do. They can't run away from it. So now if you have a 100-kilometer scale anoxia, everything will die. Fisheries will be impacted. And it's like a capping effect. Colder the water is, the denser it is. So it sinks to the bottom. Keep that in mind. Now, if you warm up the surface of the ocean by sunlight and the radiative effect of CO2, you put a lid on that ocean. So things can't get well mixed in the process. And fishes live in the surface. And now you have an anoxic surface layer. Everything dies. And the bigger problem lies in something which is very slow moving and impacts the livability on this planet. Remember, Western Europe is habitable to a much northern latitude than North America. It doesn't snow in San Francisco, but it snows a lot in New York. They're in the same exact latitude. Why is the case? Around San Francisco, the west coast of California, we have deep water coming to the surface. That water is at 4 degrees Celsius. Sounds very cold. But if the air temperature is minus 20 degrees Celsius, 4 degrees Celsius will make it warm, make it livable. That's why you can have farming in Scotland, forget about it in Siberia. Now, as we warm the globe, we slow down this circulation pattern, which means that the higher latitudes will become cooler and the lower latitudes will become warmer. Remember, ocean currents and winds blowing around is nothing but the planet trying to redistribute the energy. It gets more heat around the equator, less heat around the pole. We have to transport that heat. How do we do that? We do it via wind and we do it via water. And as you warm up, you restrict that circulation to bands. So, like, areas will start getting extreme kind of heat events.
So just to build on that, I mean, you are not only just a scientist, but you are somebody who advises a company that works on rock weathering. So could you, for the benefit of a larger audience, just tell us, what have you found regarding rock weathering? Does it really work as as a climate solution, in the sense that is it really able to capture carbon? And what are your findings regarding it as of?
Definitely. 20 years ago, when I started my PhD on silicate weathering, I had no idea what I was doing, and everybody laughed at me. Why are you looking at dissolution of rocks? Now, the Earth as a planet has been habitable for animals for about 500 million years, which is unique in the entire universe. Like, planets can go through these habitability cycles. It can become suddenly very cold, suddenly very warm. This planet, without carbon dioxide, should be at minus 18 degrees Celsius. With carbon dioxide, it's about plus 15 degrees Celsius, global average temperature. But that means the carbon dioxide levels cannot go beyond a particular value or below a particular value. We will lose liquid water. The planet won't remain habitable. Now, sources of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere is the mantle, the deep earth, which contains most of the carbon. But how do we remove carbon from this atmosphere? So if we start pumping CO2 to the atmosphere, it's going to have a runaway warming effect. But it never happens. Why? Because as you build up carbon dioxide, temperatures go up, rainfall go up, and the CO2 starts reacting with rock, because dissolving in rainwater, it forms carbonic acid. The reason why we were all told, don't drink that bottle of Pepsi, because it is acidic, it's going to corrode your teeth. So the same exact things happen naturally. CO2 gets consumed by what we call chemical weathering. It's a natural process, it's a slow process. 55 million years ago, there were crocodiles in Antarctica. How did we go from a crocodile-ridden place to an icy place? Because of the uplift of the Himalayas, we had fresh rock, which got chemically weathered. It changed seawater chemistry, it lowered CO2, it cooled the globe. And enhanced rock weathering is nothing but taking that rock, making a powder of it. Essentially, it's the difference between dissolving a sugar cube versus granulated sugar. Granulated sugar will dissolve way faster than sugar cubes. And so that's the science behind it. The science has been around for more than 100 years. All is the technological application of it in a place where the weathering will happen fast enough.
So just as there's rock weathering, Arunabha, similarly, there's so many companies now who are trying to generate carbon credits using a variety of other schemes. There's biochar. There are a lot of forestry schemes, where people are growing forests, to sequester carbon. So my concern is, and I'm wondering if you also see this as a concern, isn't this all a very convenient way to test out, where you generate carbon credits, and ultimately these are bought over by major fossil fuel companies like Shell or the other oil companies, and the effort is to just let the world continue, because these are rich companies, they can buy these credits. some of these technologies are still being tested. I mean, I don't know how credible they are yet in terms of doing the job that they do. So do you see this as a greater bias on just seeing that a market continues rather than the world collectively, actively solve or work towards a 1.5 goal?
See, Jacob, there's two different questions in your question. One is, what is the response? Is the response to reduce the emissions or to suck out the emissions, right?
Yeah.
And the second is, do we allow the market to do that, or is there a different way to do it, right? And so rather than answer it as, is there a concern or not, we have to understand why emissions reductions are necessary, but also why emissions removals or carbon removals are necessary. Net zero means you don't get to zero. Net zero means you approximate zero. You bring the emissions curve down close to zero and you still have residual emissions. Our net zero model suggests that we'll have liquid hydrocarbons for India well into the 2050s. So, but the world has to get to net zero by 2050. That means there will be residual. So while you have to keep reducing the emissions that are going into the atmosphere, which means you build out a clean air electricity system, you clean up industrial energy, you clean up buildings, you clean up agriculture, and so forth, there will be residual emissions. And in order to have gigatons worth of carbon removals, a gigaton is 1 billion tons, right? So 1 billion tons worth or 5 billion tons worth of carbon removals 20 years from now, you have to start investing in those technologies today. So that's the basic mathematics, right? You've got to do both. How do you do it is a different question. Again, going back to your first question, the idea or the philosophy of the UNFCCC was that these technologies would be developed and then diffused and dispersed. Now, that's obviously not happened. So the pendulum has swung in the other direction, saying, well, the market will solve it. The truth, as with everything else, lies somewhere in between. The market is needed. No one's going to invest in technologies, just like with pharmaceuticals, for instance. You're not going to invest in these technologies that's going to take up billions of dollars of capex and then just give it all out for free. So the market does expect a return. The investor does expect a return. But there is a way to do this more cooperatively as well. India, for instance, let's just talk about enhanced rock weathering. Our calculations show that, for instance, especially in the Deccan Plateau, etc., our basalt rock formations can potentially absorb up to 600 gigatons of CO2, right? 600 billion tons. That's giant, right? So are we going to be the carbon sink of the world? Well, even if we are fractionally a carbon sink of the world, we then become potentially a laboratory for the development of these technologies. So if someone is putting in the capital, someone is developing the technology, someone is offering their geography as a laboratory, that kind of pooled resource co-development of technology is the paradigm we have to move towards. Once we do that, then everybody begins to have a stake in the carbon or the low carbon economy of the future. Unless we do that, we end up with suboptimal outcomes, either a few billionaires thinking they'll have a catch-all silver bullet solution, and then they will milk it in the global markets. I don't see that happening. Or, on the other hand, you're a poor country, you just keep waiting that someone will solve the problem for you and then hand you the solution. Once you get away from these extremes, you realize, as Ambassador Tirumurthy was speaking in a different context, a rising India, a $4 trillion economy India, has a strategic interest in having a global role in dealing with this problem, because it also serves its interest in continuing to drive its industrial and overall economic development.
So when you have a strategic interest like this, does it make sense for India to go in for the equivalent of some kind of a climate technology mission? Just like we have AI missions, we have a quantum mission.
I co-chaired the climate and energy track for the science, technology, innovation policy for India during the pandemic. One of the missions we suggested was the green hydrogen mission, which we already have now. It's approved by cabinet. It is the world's second largest mission. I had also suggested a carbon removals mission. That's not there yet, but given that we have stuff going on green steel, we have a new mission on critical minerals, I think a carbon removals mission would be in India's strategic interest, both from an environmental point of view, but also from an economic point of view.
Suruchi, if hypothetically, let's say we had a climate mission of this sort, what do you think that would take in terms of investment? How challenging would it be for a country like India to invest appropriately towards being able to achieve something of the sort?
At the end of the day, the kind of challenges that are posed by climate change basically means that every country needs to get their house in order. And if you go by that understanding, one is looking out for support from developed countries and other countries who can share their technology and finance with developing countries basically facing these challenges. Can be looked at, but in case that doesn't come across, and as we see that the way the climate finance discussions have gone, I think countries need to basically reassess their situation with regard to what they can do and deliver at their end. So I tend to agree with what Dr. Arunabha just mentioned, that obviously we need to have our programs basically structured around the technologies that we would like to give a push within the country and have budgets around them, basically structured so that we can have our organizations basically work towards development of these technologies, testing of these technologies, and scaling up of these technologies if they work out. We are also trying to work on disruptive technologies, in TERI, we're working on geoengineering technologies to see what kind of a role can large-scale technologies play in terms of addressing the challenge. Because if we were not as we were not as a world as a whole be able to deliver the next 20-30 years in what is needed with regards to the changes that are required, I think we will have to look at technologies that are not being looked at right now. And for that, we would not wait for the next 20-30 years for the research to start. Therefore, programs and missions structured around future technologies that can basically be looked at, which can basically contribute and make an impact to the issues that basically we are facing. I think that is a requirement, and countries like India, where we are focusing on the Mangalyaan and other technologies where we basically take pride that we're able to achieve something, and this is something as important as that because it has something to do with our existence on planet Earth. So I do think that India as a country should be able to put those resources aside to also focus on developing such missions or programs that basically look at what can be done, to be able to address the challenges that we're facing planet.
But Suruchi, as far as climate is concerned, sometimes technologies can have paradoxical effects. Now, you're somebody who works also on air pollution. Now, here is this very funny paradox, regarding climate and air pollution, which is that, there's black carbon that is coming out from all our smokestacks and our vehicles. Now, absurdly, it is this black carbon and this pollution, in the Delhi haze, etc., that is actually to some level shielding us from the true heat that is generated from greenhouse gases, right? It is, in a sense, deflecting some of the black aerosols are deflecting some of the heat away. That means if we solved air pollution, we would actually see more greenhouse gas warming, paradoxically. So I'm wondering, how do we make choices in the sense, how do we prioritize actions in a way that we are sometimes not worse off than from where we started? Suruchi, that was for you. Yeah.
So, actually, the air pollutants, they are a mix of reflectors and absorbents, and black carbon actually enhances the heat and is not a reflector. But there are other, pollutants out there which are reflectors. When you're looking at a particular issue, and specifically when you're talking about an environmental issue, you have to look at it in the holistic sense. So while some of the air pollutants do reflect, the radiation back and to the Earth's surface in a certain way, the effect is very localized. But you cannot ignore the fact that there are huge repercussions on people's health that have not been adequately studied and covered, and we don't even speak about what is happening because of the bad air quality that we have in the cities around us. So you cannot present a solution by creating another problem. And frankly speaking, I feel you would have to deal with both. So the challenge is, while you're dealing with air quality on the other hand, where you basically have to, treat the air pollutants and see how you can reduce those levels. On the other hand, there is this challenge of climate change, and I do not think the air pollutants come as a solution for reducing the heating effect. We will have to find other solutions. There are other technologies out there which can help resolve the issue. And those are the things that we will need to focus on and basically scale up.
So, Arunabha and Sambuddha, do you think there are some geoengineering or some technologies that are downright problematic? I mean, Sambuddha, let me just begin with the recent news that, Colossal Biosciences claims to have, bring out of extinction the dire wolf. And apparently this would make one day the creation, the bringing back of the woolly mammoth or any of those, tundra roaming, animals. And all of this is somehow some way to keep the permafrost maintained. I mean, does some of this sound really far-fetched?
It's definitely far-fetched. It's just an excuse to do experiments, let's be honest about it, because the presence of a species or absence of it will not change the course of global warming based on carbon dioxide emissions. And if we were that bothered about extinction of species, then we will be doing a lot about the polar bears, who are already actually present there, instead of reviving species and then giving them a hinterland to live in. Now, going back to your last one, because it's related, allowing atmospheric pollution to reduce warming is like taking painkillers if you have a broken leg, right? You'll survive on it for a few years and then you'll die of ulcer or something like that. And you don't want to do that. You want to fix the problem, it's a temporary relief. And obviously, geoengineering can have side effects. And that's why pilot scale studies are extremely important. Long-term pilot scale studies are even more important. Like, you can do something for a couple of years and say, oh, it's working fine. But maybe in 5 years' time, you start seeing those side effects. So everything has to be done with a cautious approach, but with an open mind, because without taking risk, we are not going to break this barrier.
Arunabha, so we are agreed that we must move away from coal and fossil fuel, okay? So what do you think we should plumb more for? Should we just go all out, expand, invest more on nuclear energy, or should we invest scarce monies on something like direct air capture? Where would you think that, or should we just do everything at the same time?
I mean, for a growing economy, it has to be all of the above. Look, first of all, my request to the Hindu Huddle is next time, do this as a climate and economy panel rather than a climate panel. Because either you'll have the environmentalists in the room and the economists will leave, or you'll have the economists in the room and the environmentalists will leave.
So we have the scientists and the policy guys.
So the reason I say this is, India is growing at 6.5%. Our power demand is growing at 9%. Our peak power demand, I mean, Bangalore is particularly warm right now. right? Our peak power demand is growing at about 12%. Now, how do I meet that peak power demand? Make sure my buildings, my industries don't shut down, don't slow down. They operate 24/7, 3 shifts a day, say in a factory, right? So our economy can keep going. So you need to be able to deliver the energy. Now, if we need, say, under current technologies, we might need about 5 million megawatts of solar. But we will also need about 200,000 megawatts or 230,000 megawatts of nuclear for net zero, right? At least that's what our net zero model shows. So it has to be a bit of all of the above. The question why I'm saying the macroeconomists need to be in the room and the economy planners need to be in the room, because you've got to look at this as a risk story. Nothing you do in life, you take you drive your car, there's a risk that your car is going to get into a crash. So do you stop going to work? No. There are higher chances of getting killed in a road accident than on a flight. Right? So you have to follow a risk approach. And in order to understand this risk approach, you've got to look at what's the current price for, say, solar or nuclear. I just spoke at a different panel just 2 weeks ago. We reduced the time to build out a nuclear power plant, say, from 10 years to, say, 5 years. You reduce the levelized cost of the electricity by 8%, which makes it much more economically viable. So we've got to think about these in this way, and yet there will be those residual emissions. The temperature, the patient will still keep warming up. The leg will still broken leg will still keep developing ulcers, and therefore you will need the harder decisions to take as well. If you get cancer, do you say, okay, now I'm going to have healthy lifestyle, or do I take the chemotherapy as well? No one's saying chemotherapy is painless, but we still do it. So if we can't think about our economy in this way, then we'll only have this as a tree hugger agenda. And as much as I like trees, climate change is not a tree hugger story alone. It is really at the heart of what will make sure that we actually get to a developed country status without having 5, 10, 15 years of droughts and floods and cyclones on a repeat cycle that takes away resources from doing anything else.
Do you think there is, with all of these, it is well accepted of the demands that climate change makes on our economy? You mentioned that we've got a climate taxonomy now to improve access to finance. We have carbon markets, in the offing, performance and trade emission schemes. But do you think that climate change as a concept has political resonance in India? Yes, in Delhi, you have the government talk about reducing pollution, air pollution, but all the other myriad effects of climate change. Do you think it is still politically evocative? And unless it is politically evocative, do you think that certain changes that ought to be made will not be made? What is your take on that?
I think the answer is yes and no. I think in certain cases, in certain ways, there's certainly a very strong political traction at a national and at a state level for what could be considered climate action. We have a very ambitious target for clean energy, as I've already mentioned, for steel, for hydrogen, etc. You go to Telangana, they want to become a green EV hub. You go to Tamil Nadu, they want to become a green hydrogen hub. You go to Gujarat, they want to become a wind power hub, etc. So they are seeing that this is about industrial strategy, where the jobs and growth will come in addition to sustainability. What we also need to do is internalize what I said earlier, the macroeconomic nature of this crisis, which is why now, for instance, very recently, we've signed an MOU with the Reserve Bank of India. Because what the Reserve Bank of India has to look at, what kind of risks are there to the overall the financial health of the economy. Now, is climate one of those risks? So those assessments are needed. Similarly, when you have national security assessments, You got to look at, we're talking about the Indus Waters Treaty, how are the water flows going to get impacted? Right? And that is a national security issue. If precipitation patterns are changing at a tehsil level in India, that matters. If you're going to put in $200 million in a new steel plant in a particular district, can you guarantee that that plant is not going to get flooded within 10 years when your capex needs to be recouped over the next 30 years? So these kinds of risk assessments need to be internalized. I think on the new sectors that can drive the jobs growth story, there's certainly a lot of traction. Once we start internalizing that, it's not just one more disaster or one more flash flood, but it's a systemic challenge that is affecting hundreds of billions of dollars of potential GDP, then we will have more traction than what we have. But I am quite encouraged about the level of efforts that have already been taken.
Just 5.5 minutes more on this counter. I would like to open the floor for questions from the audience. So I just have time for 2 questions maximum. So anybody would like to come up? Yes, hello. The gentleman in the black T-shirt over here.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, all right.
If you could just stand up and speak a bit slowly because it's echoing over here.
Oh, all right. With respect to climate justice, I would like to play the devil's advocate. You often keep harping upon the fact that industrialized countries should bear the brunt and bear the responsibility. Make no mistake about it.
I'm sorry, you're a bit unclear. Could you just come a bit forward because then we get a better sense of the sound. Can you just come a bit forward and just hold the mic closer to your mouth?
Oh, is it not on? Anyway.
Hold it like this.
Oh, okay. So, with respect to climate justice, I'd like to play the devil's advocate here. We often keep harping upon the fact that industrialized countries have to bear the brunt and have to bear the responsibility. Make no mistake about it. The rest of the world, which failed to sustain its industrialization programs, especially the Eastern Soviet bloc or the Nehruvian India, it's not because they did not want to industrialize or they were more environment friendly or more altruistic. It's just that the way they had designed it, that they had designed the industrialization programs failed.
Okay, so I think that's a comment. So you just don't, you could probably take it offline. Anybody else got a question per se that they would like to ask panelists? Yes, ma'am. So, okay, I'll just come back to you after. Sir had raised his hand first. So you can just go with the question.
I think we need to be more self-critical in our culture. We are not questioning what are we doing in our life. Even recently, the big what happened in Ayodhya, big event, environmental destruction happened. So we are not questioning what are we doing in our life which create problem for climate. We are only thinking about solution. And nowadays it will become a fashion. Everything can be done through artificial intelligence because we Indians are losing our common sense.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Ma'am, over to you.
Can you hear me?
You have a question for either of the panelists?
Yes. Can you hear me?
If you just hold the mic like this.
My question is, one of the last remaining frontiers is the bottom of the ocean floors. Now there is talk about mining being started at the bottom of the ocean floors. So what are your views on this?
Sambuddha, you want to take that?
That's a question I have faced too many times, and it's a very awkward question to answer for a singular reason, that there are mineral resources down there which are invaluable for our transition. Without them, we won't have efficiency improvement in terms of power consumption. So it's a necessary evil, in my opinion. Given the lack of biodiversity at the bottom of the ocean, we are mostly dealing with microbes. We are not dealing with megafaunas and stuff like that. And I often tell people driving an EV, you are doing more damage to the environment than you are driving a hybrid, which actually is way more efficient. The carbon cost of an EV and the carbon footprint of an EV is ridiculous. But we do need those metals for improving our efficiency.
Great. Thank you, audience. You've been very patient and kind. And thank you, panelists. Thank you, Suruchi, if she's not here, I guess. And it was a joy to have you over here. Thank you, everybody.